Okay, good afternoon, Maryland. This is Dr. Matt Zakreski, and if you're watching this video, you're about to hear me talk about perfectionism in my presentation, How to Stop Moving the Goalposts. So let's get started. All right. So let's set some expectations as we get going. We're here to learn what we can about perfectionism and develop some techniques to manage it. Um, Now, if we were doing this in person, I'd be asking for participation. And what I will encourage you to do is to do the exercise that I ask you to do during this presentation. And feel free to stop the video and do it because I'll tell you why we're doing it later. Um, any questions, you can feel free to email me. My email contact information is at the end of the presentation. And just remember that we're all learning together. So some of this may be new to you, some of this may be old hat, but we have to set the stage for this before we get into the intervention. So let's start. So now is a great time to grab a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. And when you're watching this, I'll ask you to give yourself 1 minute to draw the image that you're about to see on the screen. So I'm not going to stop for 1 minute like we would do this in person. So feel free to stop the video for 1 minute. And 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so if we were doing this in person, you'd have 1 minute right now to draw this bear. Time is passing, time is passing, time is passing, time is passing. Cool. 1 minute is up. Now take that drawing you've done, put it off to the side. We'll get back to it later. So what is perfectionism? Perfectionism is characterized by a person striving for flawlessness and setting high performance standards that's accompanied by critical self-evaluations and concerns regarding other people's judgment of their work. So it's not just high standards, it's the internal sense and the concern about other people. So in a word, it's driven by anxiety. And perfectionism is a very multidimensional thing. There are thoughts involved, there are behaviors that maintain perfectionism, and there's a lot of emotionality, namely anxiety, that goes along with it. I like to think of perfectionism as an aspect of personality that plays out in interactions with demand situations. So when we are asking someone to do something, that raises our anxiety, and when our anxiety is raised, our perfectionism, if it to the extent it exists, loads in. So those demand situations can be personal or professional, and we're going to talk about what that looks like. So there are two types of perfectionism. The first is adaptive. In this case, your motivation's high, but you have healthy and realistic goals. As such, you can derive pleasure from success and pleasure from having opportunities. And it's a very achievement-oriented model. It's what can I do? What is my skill set? What are the goals I'm trying to achieve? And that's adaptive perfectionism. Maladaptive perfectionism is marked by unattainable goals and impossible standards. As such, it leads to depression and anxiety because you're never getting that positive release of a job well done. Success in maladaptive perfectionism doesn't lead to pleasure. It only leads to relief. And as you go deeper into maladaptive perfectionism, those moments of relief last less and less long. And maladaptive perfectionists are failure oriented. They're very concerned on what will happen if I don't succeed. So you're already adding more anxiety. You're already worrying about your outcomes, and it can end up being sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of you're worried about what would happen, which makes you more anxious, which makes you worse, which makes you more likely to fail, thus proving that your anxiety was right. Perfectionism shows up in three directions. Now, you're likely to have a cardinal direction. So the thing that's most likely to be the driving force of your perfectionism. However, you can have all three. So your perfectionism can be self-oriented. So you put impossible standards on yourself. I have to look perfect. I have to act perfect. I have to perform perfectly. You can also be perfectionistic towards others. So you hold others to unrealistic standards of behavior. My partner must be perfect. My boss must get me 100% of the time or it's a bad job. And those unrealistic standards, because we can never control other people's behavior, sets us up for complicated and difficult interpersonal relationships. And then socially prescribed perfectionism is you perceive unrealistic expectations from others. And as a clinical psychologist, I see this one a lot because kids will come in and say, well, my teacher or my parents or my coach or my instructor or my sensei won't like me or will fire me or will kick me out of the program if I'm not perfect, if I don't get straight A's, if I'm not first chair, if I don't have a black belt by age 9. And one of the things we're going to get to and process as a group is this idea that you can challenge somebody on those thoughts and they may say to you, yeah, I know that's not actually true. I know my parents aren't going to disown me if I get a B in math. However, perception is reality. So if that anxiety exists because of the thought that exists, then we have to treat the feeling as true. Even if your rational brain is saying, well, I mean, I don't think they're actually going to disown me. So that makes walking forward with this kind of tricky. I like this picture, and when I work with kids on perfectionism, I like to pull this picture up because it shows you all the different pieces, right? There's a fear of failure, which leads to procrastinating, holding back on working. It's this total focus on results, not the process. And those results you're looking at are unrealistic. And as such, it puts you in this mindset of being highly critical towards self and others. Ultimately, perfectionism, if unchecked, especially if it's maladaptive, can lead to these things: low self esteem, feelings of what we call contingent worthiness. So I only have value if I succeed. And it's so important, especially with young kids who are more perfectionistic, is to be very explicit with them that they have value just for waking up in the morning. They have value because they're here, because they had breakfast, because they showed up at class, because a million other things. It's not about outcome, it's about participation. And that part is really key. Um, Anxiety leads to all or nothing thinking. I'm good if I get 100, I'm bad if I get anything else. Depression, high anxiety, and panic attacks, a lot of, for adults, a lot of workplace dissatisfaction, because life really is about tolerating the things that aren't perfect. We have to accept that nothing can be perfect. And in doing so, learn how to deal with the parts that aren't. Now, I'm not saying stay in your terrible job if you have a terrible job, right? That's you can have adaptive perfectionism and move towards better things. But if you're looking for that perfect workplace, that those unrealistic expectations will get in your way. Um, High levels of anxiety release a hormone called cortisol in our bodies, and over time, cortisol is linked to high levels of medical problems, including high blood pressure, strokes, and ulcers. Perfectionistic people have usually worse social and romantic connections. Perfectionism gets completely in the way of creativity because creativity, right, is about being free and loose and thinking outside the box. And those are things that anxiety doesn't really let us do. And ultimately, procrastination. Now, procrastination gets its own slide because people say, wait, really, procrastination? Wouldn't the perfectionist want to get it done right away? And that would make sense, but here's where it shows up. So out there and watching this wherever you are, if you've ever procrastinated on a big project, this slide will probably make sense to you because procrastination is about trying to control anxiety. Nobody likes to feel out of control, and anxiety makes us feel out of control. So procrastination is an attempt to control that anxiety. So if I never turn this project in, I don't have to get feedback. I don't have to find out if maybe I'm a bad writer or artist or dancer. As long as I keep the idea in my mind, nobody's going to give me feedback. No one's going to pick at it. No one's going to post a long message on Tumblr about all the inconsistencies. In my brain, it's perfect, and I want it to stay there. Overworking, the whole one more paragraph, that'll really get it, right? And then if I do 5 times the work that's expected of me, they'll be so excited or impressed that they're not going to look too closely at me. We call this the shotgun approach. Not a targeted shot, but just blast and put everything else. Fire hose would also work. One of the things that's key here is that anxiety makes the problem seem bigger than it is. And it sets up this cycle that it makes us avoid then the problem because it seems bigger. It's not a bear that's in the hallway, it's a small dog. But the longer we avoid going into the hallway and facing whatever that thing is that's barking and growling, the bear feels bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, which keeps us avoiding it. But then we're stressed out, right? So, to use a case example, I work with a college student, and he had an 8-page paper due on 1984, which very very topical right now. And he didn't get the book, and he and I had processed it, and I said, but 8 pages, so let's talk about how we're going to set that up. And every time I checked in with him, he just kept saying, I can't do it. I'm not starting. I can't do it. And so his stress level climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed. So then he's not sleeping, then he's not eating. It starts, he's like, you start to get those thoughts, right? I'm going to get kicked out of school. I'm going to lose my scholarship. My girlfriend's going to break up with me, and it just, but that anxiety wasn't enough to motivate him to move towards the problem. They kept making him run away. But the further he ran away, the bigger the problem seemed. So ultimately, I made him sit with me in session, over Zoom, and do an outline and start writing. And I said, yeah, I'm going to just watch you do this, and I'm going to be here to coach you. And he powered through. But that's the thing. It's anxiety can really serve to get in our way here. And if this makes sense to you, I want to say one of my key terms that comes up when working with perfectionism. There are always going to be reasons not to do something. Those reasons might be good reasons. Those reasons might be irrational reasons. Those reasons might only make sense to you. But there are always going to be reasons not to do something. What if you focused on the reasons to do something? Because there are no awards given for books that were never written. Those great ideas that you're afraid to get feedback on are great ideas, and the world deserves to see them and benefit from them. So take the plunge and see what happens. So I love to show this picture to people. In person, I ask people to raise their hand if this bothers them, and then show me fingers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on how much it bothers them. I get a lot of 5-finger hands, and people go, "Can you change the slide? Can you change the slide?" And isn't it funny that this is just a picture, right? It can't hurt you. But if you're a more perfectionistic person, the fact that this isn't perfect really triggers anxiety. And isn't that fascinating? So don't worry, I'm going to move the slide now. So let's talk about the comparison effect. So one of the things here that we want to focus on is that perfectionistic feelings are increasing across the globe, and they're controlled for all SES and cultural groups. So whether you are, what country you're in, what neighborhood you live in, perfectionism is on the rise. And they've tracked that, and it pretty closely follows the rise of the 24/7 news cycle and the rise of social media. And what that means is that it's basically impossible not to compare yourself to others, but comparing yourself to others fuels perfectionism. Think about what life used to look like. You could compare yourself to the people in your town, in your school, in your office, and your circles were relatively small, even if you traveled a lot, because you couldn't call to mind what other people doing that often. But now we all have our phones, and we all have computers and tablets and the 24/7 news cycle, and we are bombarded with images and stories and narratives of people who are doing different things, amazing things, better things. So I'm not just focused on the 800 people in my high school. I'm focused on the thousands of kids in every high school in the country, maybe the world. And the more people we see, the worse we feel, because there's always going to be someone out there who does it better or does it different, who's famous or richer, prettier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the comparison effect is, is this unfortunate side effect of the flattening of the world. Now, some psychologists would tell you, well, just don't compare yourself to people. I don't think that's possible. So if you compare yourself to people, which is a human thing to do, we have to ask ourselves, are your targets for comparison realistic? They may not be. If you're 8 years old and you love science and space, it's much healthier to compare yourself to other kids in your school than it is to compare yourself to Neil deGrasse Tyson, because you're not Neil deGrasse Tyson. There's only one of them. That's okay. Focus on what you can learn from somebody. So if somebody does something better than you, that's great. What are they doing that you're not doing? And can you do your version of that? Can you add that? That's okay. It's also important to say that we never know the whole story of others, but we always know our own story. So we see someone who just emerges into Hollywood and like, wow, this actor was just discovered. Isn't this incredible? And then you realize that there's so many missed auditions and callbacks and headshots and bad performances and bad reviews, and nobody just emerges fully formed in Hollywood. But that's the narrative that gets packaged. So we think when we look at ourselves, well, gosh, I know how much I'm struggling to get roles in community theater, or I can't get a callback for this show, and I've gone through 7 agents, and I must be flawed, I must be bad. But we don't know that whole story. So what you need to do is just focus on the parts that you can control and see what was the thing that got somebody that big break, and can you do your version of that? Don't compare your chapter to somebody else's completed book. So one of the giants in the field of perfectionism, someone that I got to learn something from, was Randy Frost, who came up with the Frost multidimensional perfectionism scale. Now, this is the thing. I know a fair amount about perfectionism because I work with it clinically, but I don't have 40 years of research in this. Randy Frost does. So I went to Randy Frost's website and I learned what I could from his TED Talks and his papers, and sent him an email, and he was nice enough to write back. That's what we want to do, friends. So Frost noted that perfectionism is marked by heightened concern over making mistakes, which leads to catastrophizing. If I get a 97 on my math test, I'm getting kicked out of school. Catastrophe. High personal standards, striving for excellence, the doubting of quality of one's actions. There's still that perfectionistic voice in my head that's going, is this even a good presentation? Is anybody going to download it? Is anybody going to watch it? I hope you do, and I hope you're enjoying it so far. A preference for order and organization. Once again, there's that control piece, right? If all my shoes are perfectly lined up, that's one less thing I have to worry about. And that's not inherently bad. It's just how much energy are we spending on it? And I saved the middle two for the end because remember how I said earlier that perception is reality. So the perception of high parental expectations and high parental criticism are so important for sustaining and creating perfectionism. Remember, it doesn't have to be objectively true. You just have to think it's true. And we know our gifted kids who don't always read social cues super well, who are very emotionally intense and hard on themselves, are more likely to perceive high standards. So I will say to my clients, this is a place to practice this because you can't get an A in therapy. You do well just by being here. Good job being here, right? And then when I talk to teachers, say, can you set up a situation where you don't give this kid grades for a while and just let them understand and experience that, hey, you are the person that matters. You're what matters, not your spelling test, not your basketball tryout. It's you. So breaking those perceptions are key to unraveling perfectionism. So why gifted kids ultimately, right? And as this cartoon shows, can I do better than a perfect score? Gifted kids would try. Um, Gifted kids show up in perfection for these 3 reasons. One, high intellectual OE, deep engagement with areas of interest, and that high emotional weight. Heightened creativity. Gifted kids see and conceptualize things that others can't. So their expectations and their sense of quality rises higher than other kids. It's not just, am I going to make a model of the solar system out of styrofoam balls? It's, can I get appropriate objects from my community and space them out properly using, modern research in astrophysics, and then just it spirals out of control. And then this intersection with skills and development, I think this is so important. We know that gifted kids develop asynchronously, and that can manifest in many ways, not the least of which is weaker development of the prefrontal cortex or our behavioral inhibition system. But also, think about how the fact that gifted kids tend to be weaker in fine motor skills early on. So say you have a musically inclined or an artistically inclined gifted kid who can conceptualize a beautiful concerto that they want to write, and the music's in their brain, it's in their heart, but they don't have the fine motor skills to play that on the violin yet. Imagine how frustrating that would be. Imagine how much that would hurt. That's where you see where these gifted kids are going to feel that pain. So here's a great case study. One of my favorite things about putting these presentations together is I get to learn about people I didn't know about. So Carl Friedrich Gauss was a German mathematician and scientist, and he's sometimes referred to as the Princeps Mathematicorum, or the first or primary mathematician. So he had sizable contributions to number theory and polynomial algebra that we still use today. So this is still a giant, almost 200 years later. Um, but the thing about Gauss is he refused to publish any work that was not complete and that he felt wouldn't be above criticism. So when he died and they went through his office, they found paper after paper after paper after paper of exceptional high quality math and physics work that he refused to publish because it didn't meet this imaginary standard in his head. And his biographer, Eric Temple Bell, felt that he would have advanced mathematics by another 50 years if he had just published some of the things that he had shoved in his drawer because they weren't perfect. So when we keep our ideas in our head, when we hold ourselves to these impossible standards, not only do we wound ourselves, right, and we don't get the satisfaction and the joy and the reinforcement from a job well done, but we potentially hurt the world. Imagine what other mathematical work could have been done if Gauss had moved things that forward that much further. Who knows? So you might be a perfectionist and probably you're sitting there at your computer nodding vigorously at this point. So if you've ever spent 30 minutes writing and rewriting a 2-sentence email, if you get a 98 on a test, and that's definitely you failed. You have trouble being happy for others who are successful, hold yourself to impossible standards of others, skipping class or avoiding a chore because, and how gifted kid is this? It's pointless to do it because I suck at it. It's pointless to do it because I can't be perfect. You're totally focused on the end product rather than the process of learning. And you avoid trying something new because what if I'm not good at it? Well, and I tell my kids, you're not going to be good at it when you start. If you've never played golf before, you're probably going to suck at golf. That's okay as long as you're willing to learn from what you do and move forward. Now, I have this picture here of these skydivers, and I think it's a good illustration of maladaptive and adaptive perfectionism. If you're going to jump out of a plane with 100 other people and make some images and some patterns in the air, you want people held to a high standard, right? Because your life kind of depends on what they do. But here's the where the question really comes up. Let's say that you're jumping through the air and you're getting into position and somebody grabs your ankle, but a little higher than they're supposed to. Not dangerously so, not inappropriately so, just higher. Now because it's not perfect, you've kicked them off, right? Now imagine the chain reaction that might occur if you kick that person off because they weren't perfect. They might be able to latch on. Maybe the whole thing falls apart. There has to be some wiggle room. There has to be some bar for error. Otherwise, we may have catastrophe. So now that I've sort of explained perfectionism, and I love this cartoon because it's definitely that 30 minutes to write a 2-line email thing, let's talk about how we treat it. But first, pull your bear back out. This is probably sitting there next to you now. Take a good look at your bear. How does that drawing make you feel? Good, bad, terrible, indifferent? When you think about the drawing, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about, I did a pretty good job? Are you thinking about, wow, I'm kind of terrible at this? I'm thinking about, well, it's a good thing I'm not an artist. And as you talk to yourself, how do you feel about yourself? Does it change your mood today? Does it change how you feel about me and this presentation? It's worth touching those feelings. And let's go back to the drawing because it's important. This is a very complicated drawing. There's a lot of lines. There's depth because it's a classic 3/4 drawing. And you need to have sizable art control to be able to do this. Many of us don't have that ability, and that's okay because not many of us are artists. Now, when I do this in person, I'll usually draw it to show people, and then I tell them, not only do I know what's coming, right? Because the piece of this is that it was a surprise to you. So A, I knew this was coming, and B, I was a professional artist for many years, so I have a background in art. So I can look at something like this and draw it and do pretty well at it and feel okay about that. But I can't hold you to that standard. There's someone out there watching this who's maybe an art teacher or a graphic designer who's better at this than me. Now I can let that go. Can you? So let's talk about CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is all about changing the relationship to your thoughts. Remember, perfectionism gives us these maladaptive thinking patterns, all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, and thinking in black and white. So we're going to shift our relationship to our thoughts from top down thinking, where you look down, it's like, look how far I have to go, look how far away I am from my goal, to bottom up thinking. So consider yourself on a staircase. If you're at this and you're on the first floor, you're trying to get to the second floor. If you look down from the second floor to the first floor, it seems very, very long. But if you're on the first floor and you see your goal, you get to give yourself credit for whatever work you've done. Maybe you've gotten to the base of the stairs. Maybe you took one step today. Maybe you took two. But when you build yourself up, you get to give yourself more credit. You get to reinforce your process rather than focusing on the parts that are missing. Because when we focus on the parts that are missing, there's that failure model again, right? It's going to make us feel worse. Any steps you take towards a goal, big, small, main main quest, side quest, whatever, it's all progress, and progress needs to be rewarded and celebrated. It's very helpful to help your kids, help yourself name perfectionism for what it is. If your kids are cycling on perfectionism and they're stuck, help them talk about their anxiety. What about this is making you anxious? Which one of these automatic thoughts, these maladaptive thinking patterns are showing up? And if you get your kid to say, well, if I don't get these forms right, I'm going to get kicked out of my Taekwondo class, say, you're not going to. I know it feels like you're going to, but you're not. Let's work on doing the best you can. Do bottom up thinking, right? Maybe you can't get to the second story with this particular form, but can you get 10 out of 12 steps? Because that's pretty good. And we work on that. One more piece here. And if you've ever heard me talk before, you know I'm not a fan of the word should. To me, should is the word could and all that possibility of everything you could do, plus the shame of beating yourself up for something you haven't done or can't do. So you could say, I should be able to get an A on this test. You could get an A on this test. There are lots of reasons why you could, but there are also lots of reasons that might get in your way. So instead of saying, I should have more friends, I should have a better job, I should have a more attractive partner or a partner in general, those are all coulds. Don't beat yourself up for something you don't have. Think about what's getting in your way, because once you move from a beating yourself up mindset to a problem solving mindset, then naturally your brain's going to start working on finding a solution rather than just piling on how terrible you are. Another strategy here is exposure and response prevention. Let's talk about how it's very hard to just stop being perfectionism. And that's something we all fall in the trap of. Just stop. Just be cool. Just let it go. Really hard to do. Instead, treat it like an anxiety regimen for like a phobia. You know, work on something you want to do and then stop before you want to or it's done. Right? So if you are making, oh gosh, let's say you're painting something, and let's say you're painting a still life and you want to work on it for an hour. After 35 minutes, walk away from your paints. And then just check in with yourself. How do you feel? Do you feel really stressed and anxious and angry? Do you feel relieved? Do you feel neutral? Right? We won't know what thoughts and feelings come up until you challenge yourself to do that. And if you feel activated and anxious and angry, can you calm yourself down? Can you take a walk? Can you have a cup of coffee? Can you watch some Netflix? Because the key thing here is that every time we try something and feel our anxious perfectionism show up, the only tool you have to this point in your life, if you deal with maladaptive perfectionism, is to deal with the anxiety by finishing the thing. Well, I mean, I have to do this. I have to keep working on it until it's done, and only then will I be happy. And that's going to save you sometimes, but let's not have that be the only tool in your toolbox. Let's set up a scenario where you can, learn to walk away and take a break, because that's going to save you way more often. You keep doing this until you increase the time you can spend away from something and how quickly you can calm down. If you keep doing the bear exercise, not only will you get used to dealing with the anxiety that comes up with it, but you'll also increase how long you can go without feeling anxious. And once you gain that mastery, that behavioral mastery, then you're in charge of your thoughts and feelings. They're not in charge of you. It's key to tell your kids and yourself your anxiety lies to you. It's telling you things are worse than they are, that you should panic and freak out. And until we do something about it, your anxiety there has no counter argument. But when you train your body to grit your teeth and say, wow, yes, not finishing this project made me feel anxious, but check this out, I was able to survive that. Then you train your body to know otherwise, and you have a counter argument. Last but not least is acceptance and commitment therapy. I would very much encourage you to take a look at this video. I'll send out the slides. Our feelings overwhelm us, and we spend tremendous energy trying to fight off those feelings. When we see that feeling and acknowledge it, we make room for it. When we make room for a feeling, we lessen its power over us. You don't want to spend all your energy fighting off a feeling. The sooner we let the feeling come and wash over us, the better we feel, and then the better we do. When you get triggered into perfectionism, try and use this sentence. Oh, this is something that triggers my perfectionism. No value judgment, just, I like spicy food, or, that is a blue car, or, I like this Netflix show. Those are just statements. Feelings themselves are not good or bad. They exist to be observed, just like us. The metaphor I use all the time, say you're driving on the highway and you hit traffic. Nobody likes sitting in traffic. I certainly don't like sitting in traffic. And you sit there and you white knuckle the steering wheel, you get angry. But getting angry in that moment doesn't change the situation you're in. You're just mad now. So you're doing this thing unpleasant and now you're mad. So what if you just drove to the side of the road, threw your hazards on, and just let the traffic jam move by? It might take 5 minutes. It might take 2 hours. We don't know. But if you're not in it, it's a lot easier to let it wash over you. And then, traffic jam cleared up, get back on the highway and go where I'm going. So just think about your thoughts and feelings as something that a stream you can step out of. Because once you realize that stepping out of the stream is a possibility, you're going to feel like they have a lot less power over you. So as parents, understand perfectionism is something that you can't just stop. Be as proactive as you can. Think about the things that cause problems. Auditions, tests, papers, art projects, whatever it is. Plan ahead for that. Model and use emotionally focused language. The more you talk about our feelings, the better we do. Encourage taking breaks. Encourage perspective taking. I know that right now this feels major, and I know right now this is the most pressing thing. I can tell you that it's not going to feel this way forever, and other opportunities will show up. But right now, I know this is how you're feeling. Anchor it. Help give your kids context with your words. Don't problem solve. Say, how can I help? Remember, the two most powerful words in the English language, that sucks. That's it, just empathy. And then your kids will be more likely to speak to you about that. Lots of communication with teachers in school. What are they seeing? Where is it showing up? And how can we get out in front of this? Schools, do we even need grades? That's a whole other PowerPoint, though I think it's certainly worth talking about. Remember, good can be the enemy of great, but great can also be the enemy of done. I tell my kids, get it done, clear the hurdle, then climb the mountain, right? If you want to finish the thing, and then take a deep dive and show us how epic this is. Use rubrics to set expectations. Using extra credit and passion projects. If your kid is really struggling with perfectionistic thoughts, they're bigger than the project, say, this is what I need you to do to get this thing checked off. Then, I want you to build me a life-size model of Ben Franklin out of pipe cleaners. Do it. Go for it. But do this first. And then use language in our feedback, in our interactions, that focus on process, not content. Ultimately, I like this cartoon as well because I think it puts perfectionism in math terms, right? Kids will tell you, I know nothing's perfect. I just want to be as close to perfect as I can. So one of the first jobs I ever had, I was a bartender in New Jersey for many years. And one night, long shift, it's 2 in the morning, we're restocking the bar for the next day. And I'm putting 6 packs of beer into the beer fridge. And I grab one and I drop it and it shatters all over the place. And I'm, as a highly perfectionist person, freaking out like, oh my gosh, I'm such an idiot. I'm a moron. I'm going to get fired. And the guy that I worked with was like, hey, let it go. He's like, it is a mathematical certainty that you will make mistakes. You can't avoid them. The numerator spot is always going to be a 1. He's like, the trick is to make the bottom part of the fraction as big as you can. So if you were making a mistake 1 out of every 10 times, try and make it 1 out of 12, 1 out of 15, 1 out of 23, 1 out of 30. Accept that there will always be a 1. You have to accept that to be able to move forward in this way, because you can make that number close to 0. You can make it vanishingly small, but vanishingly small doesn't mean 0. So I like this cartoon because I think it really expresses that point. Ultimately, we want to be anti-perfect. Perfection is not reality. Perfection is boring, right? It's not possible, so we say that, we believe it, we use it as a mantra. We put everything in context. You do the best you can under the circumstances you're in, but the circumstances always matter. I tell my kids, you either win by doing something or you learn. And we're going to learn a lot more often than we win. Everybody gets feedback. Everybody Googles. Everybody has to try again sometimes. We normalize these things. And if a kid says, I've never had to do that before, and I say, yes, I know it's hard because it's the first time you've had to do this, but everybody else does this too. So welcome to the club. Done is better than perfect. Fail means frequent attempts in learning, which I love that as an acronym. I think it's a nice reframe of that. And for my video game kids, struggling means you're going in the right direction. If you set yourself up to move towards something in a video game and you're not seeing harder bad guys and the music's not getting louder and faster, then you're going the wrong way. We want things to be more challenging. We want things to be increasingly engaging because that's how we grow. Ultimately, whatever your chosen area is, art, driving, teaching, math, ultimate frisbee, golf, water polo, whatever it is, you can make this part as big as you can, but we have to accept that there's always going to be a piece of the pie that we can't control. And in that piece of the pie that we can't control, we accept that and we make room for it. We don't give up. We just say, I think I'm a good driver and I'm going to make this part of my pie chart as big as I can. But I know that no matter how good of a driver I am, there are things that are going to be out of my control. Other drivers, wild animals, trees, sinkholes, hurricanes, whatever that might be, right? So it's a whole picture. It's 100% of something, but that 100% is always going to involve a part you can't control. Once you accept that, you'll find that your anxiety goes down a lot because you acknowledge that you can't control everything, and then you'll feel better. So lots of other resources, great books for teens and 2E learners, some awesome YouTubes and TED Talks on this, would highly recommend. And then some references for further reading. Ultimately, if you have questions on this, if it impacts you, your kids, your students, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always here to be a resource to all gifted parents and teachers and professionals. Thank you so much for your time and for being here. And this is Dr. Matt saying thanks again. And I know this presentation wasn't perfect, and that's okay. Good night, everybody.